From the Alvin and Rosalie Sarachek studio, PBS Kansas presents Kansas Week.
The city of Wichita will help with medical testing for those living in a groundwater contamination area. Wichita's $500 million school bond campaign is kicking into high gear. But first, a heated argument between a Wichita city councilman and a state lawmaker gets physical at a Topeka bar. The police are called. We'll show you the video and bring you reaction on this edition of Kansas Week. Hello and welcome to Kansas Week. I'm Jared Cerullo. A gathering of state and local lawmakers at a Topeka bar turns into a shouting and shoving match. The fight captured on video. Cake's Pilar Pedraza broke the story and reports that police were even called.
A state lawmaker and a Wichita city councilman going toe-to-toe at a reception in Topeka.
So you can start to the Celtic clock. Celtic advisor, there's 3 people arguing and shoving each other.
The disagreement caught on video.
Looking like a dumb. No, you looking like a dumb.
Littered with expletives and a common racially charged slur. State Representative Ford Carr says Wichita City Councilman Brandon Johnson started the confrontation.
He made a gesture that was just putting his finger in my face, but when he made the gesture, I rose out of my seat. I don't usually start issues, as I didn't start this one, but I'm very capable of finishing them.
Multiple witnesses told me it was the other way around, with Carr the aggressor. Both men, though, agreed the fight was over the handling of money meant to pay for medical testing in the 29th and Grove area to see if a toxic railroad spill was behind multiple, often deadly medical problems in the neighborhood they both represent. Money, Carr says, is use it or lose it, with time running out to use it. It's an issue that's very personal for both lawmakers.
And my mother, as well as my aunt, that we lived one block apart. My family has lost both of them to what could have been a product of this contamination.
I haven't publicly said it. My great uncle actually had kidney disease when he died. He lived a block across from the pollution area.
Carr says he's upset the city took 8 months to start pitching in the matching funds it needs in order to access those state dollars for medical testing, and blames Johnson, who led the city's efforts. Johnson declined to comment on the altercation, saying that would be properly investigated, and the video can speak for itself. He added, "I don't want that incident to in any way distract from the genuine positive efforts and progress we're making for residents to address the vitally needed testing and remediation at the 29th and Grove neighborhoods."
So here to discuss this and some of this week's other big stories is Cake's senior political reporter, Pilar Pedraza. Also, Democratic State Representative Esau Freeman from Wichita and Republican State Senator Stephen Owens of Heston. Thank you all for joining us. Pilar, I'll start with you. You covered the story. You broke the story yesterday. 2 lawmakers very passionate about this subject.
Yes.
Do we want them to be this passionate, though, or where do you draw that line?
Well, and that's a question lawmakers are dealing with right now. There are conversations going on in Topeka over whether or not there should be disciplinary action or an expulsion for Ford Carr. Where those conversations go, I don't know. We're going to have to wait and see. I did want to quickly mention, though, if you were watching that video as the story was going on, you would have seen at one point another gentleman kind of fell over a table and hit his head against the wall. That was State Representative Henry Helgerson, also from our area. He's out of the Eastboro area. And as far as we know, he's fine. He has not responded to my efforts to reach out to him, but I have spoken with others who were there that night who said that he was fine, he was okay, his head hurt a little bit. He was also on the House floor the next day speaking on an amendment to a bill, seemed perfectly normal.
And I from what I understand, Representative Helgerson is recovering from shoulder surgery, so this kind of makes the situation even worse.
Yeah, he had just last month gotten the sling off from rotator cuff surgery, so yeah. It's definitely a scary situation, if nothing else.
Esau, what do you think here?
I think that this is unhinged and that there is no room for political violence. I understand people get passionate, but we have to have the decorum with one another on the same side of the aisle, the opposite side of the aisle, to keep it verbal and keep our composure.
Yeah.
So,
and these guys are passionate about this project. They clearly live in the area. All their families live in the area.
Yep.
But the accusation from, it sounds like Representative Carr anyway, is that the city has been dragging its feet for too long. We're 8 months down the line from this starting.
Sure.
Is that a problem?
Oh, it's definitely a problem. And, you know, I haven't talked to Ford, but I know where he's coming from with that because, you know, we saw the picture at the beginning of the episode where we had state lawmakers that had said, hey, we're going to give $2 million to this, but you have to match it. The thing that confuses me here is that Carr goes after Brandon Johnson, but there were 7 other city council members, and at least one of them was there, and Ford was only attacking Johnson.
That's interesting.
So
Absolutely.
I wasn't there. I don't get it, but we cannot accept behavior like this. This is embarrassing, and it needs to be dealt with. Yep. So I've worked with Brandon Johnson a lot over the years, and I think we had a conversation one time. We both used to be very involved activists, and I did want to clarify, I'm not a state representative. I ran for.
I apologize
that's
for that,
okay.
yes.
I would love to be a state representative, but I'm currently not. So, you know, I've worked with Brandon, and we were activists together throughout a lot of our younger years, and, you know, I've never seen him lose his cool or start something with somebody. And the other thing I would say there is that, you know, we had a conversation one time about how different it is going from that activist side to the other side where you're actually there trying to solve the problems, and all of a sudden you start to see that it's a lot more difficult than it seems from the perspective of the activist or people who are just not in those rooms, because the city of Wichita could have come up with the money,
right?
But there's a budget deficit. There's all these reasons that they can't do it, and that should anger everybody that we're not taking care of a portion of our population that has been redlined and not taken care of.
Senator Owens, you're the only state lawmaker here in this room. What are your thoughts here?
You know, passion runs deep in Topeka. It truly does. And, you know, violence has broken out in Topeka. There's pictures that hang right outside the house wall of the armed rebellion. But we're past that. We as leaders have got to be the examples. Political violence is all too common, and the rhetoric has got to stop. The fighting has got to stop. We have got to get back to a place where we can passionately disagree without it becoming personal. Because at the end of the day, I am one of 165, and we all come from a different place with a different perspective, with a different upbringing, and we need to learn to respect one another's upbringing and not allow it to become personal.
Is the $125,000 enough? Who wants to tackle that?
No, absolutely
well,
not.
it's matching funds.
Right.
The city and county actually, in the long term, need $1 million to get all of the money from the state.
But as we were talking about, the city is in such a budget crunch right now.
So right now they're trying to get as much of it as they can from private donors, but they're running out of time. They have to have, this money is use it or lose it by the end of June, by the end of this fiscal year. If it doesn't get used by then, it goes back into the state general fund, and to get it, they're going to have to get another bill passed. And when I was talking with Carr earlier this week when we were working on this story, he was like, I don't know if we can get another bill through.
Yeah.
And I think that's very reasonable to say, because we're really tightening the belt on state spending this year. That's a complete focus of both the House and the Senate. And reappropriations like this, when you don't have the buy-in from locals, is definitely going to be a hard sell.
Right. So the issue that reportedly sparked this fight, the groundwater issue that we're talking about, the Wichita City Council voted to provide funding for medical testing of residents affected by pollution in the vicinity of 29th and Grove. Industrial pollution many years ago contaminated the groundwater there. It's been the subject of ongoing health concerns, and Cake's Nick Nelson explains how the city plans to help those affected.
Motion passes 7-0.
The Wichita City Council unanimously approved allocating $125,000 from the sale of the Hyatt Hotel for medical testing for those possibly affected by groundwater contamination near 29th and Grove. This comes after the state put up $2.5 million last year, but that can only be used if the city and Sedgwick County match the funds.
We are planning for the remainder of the time available, which is until June 30th of this year, is to work on philanthropic ways to get the other $750,000. We've been working with the Kansas Health Foundation for quite some time around that We believe their expertise will not only help us find those funds, but maybe even receive a contribution.
Some community members are still upset with how slow officials have been to address the contamination.
We've been fighting this for 2 years or so. And so I just did not want to keep prolonging this procedure of trying to get money. I don't want to wait too long. We have people passing away, and we don't know why.
Former City Council member Levanta Williams grew up in the neighborhood and says members of her family have died because of the contamination. The state didn't release findings of groundwater contamination to the public until 2022, decades after the spill at the Union Pacific rail yards. And it told people living in the neighborhood the contamination is connected to cancer.
If I were sitting at the table, then I would probably ask, what is the time frame? What can I look at? Is there anything that can be done sooner rather than later?
City Council member Brandon Johnson says the city will continue to work with its partners to raise money to match the state's funds.
The groundwater is still contaminated, the soil is still contaminated, and it will be until we get those devices into the ground. So we're looking twofold. How do we make that happen? Because that's something that has to happen, and my goal is for it to happen this year.
And one thing I want to make sure people know as well is that the state knew about this 30 years ago. So when we're talking about the blame game, there are multiple entities that maybe need to shoulder some of the blame. Senator Owens?
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, I feel like the state, albeit much too late, has at least stepped up to the table and said, hey, we'll allocate our part, you do your part. And look, I completely respect the Wichita City Council trying to be prudent with taxpayer dollars. I understand there's a tight budget, I understand their challenges, but I love the approach of a public-private partnership on something like this, where we can get those philanthropic organizations involved and hopefully move this forward, because it absolutely needs to be addressed.
Who's going to step up, though? Who's going to step up in the community to make that first donation?
And I think the thing is like, where are our priorities? If we knew about this so long ago, maybe instead of buying a baseball stadium that's traded hands several times, maybe we should have taken care of the citizens in Wichita. And whatever our legislators or elected officials do, we the citizens have to pay for it. We have to pay for the taxes, for the sidewalks, for everything else. So we're going to end up footing the bill on this, and we need to look at where our priorities are. How much do we care about being moral to our friends and neighbors?
Well, and this is a community that historically, time and time and time again, has been shoved aside, left behind, given less, and up until now, it's been economic. You can't live outside of this area because of segregation. Well, okay, you can live outside, but we're not going to give you the money for mortgages to live outside of this because of redlining. Oh, you can live wherever you want, but if you go here, your kids aren't going to be able to go to neighborhood schools. They've got to go be bused an hour away to the other end of town because of busing. This is all the same community. Oh, you've got your own thriving Main Street? Well, we're going to run a highway through it so that your Main Street dies. Time and time again. And now it's not just economic, it's it's lives, it's health. So it's no wonder that there is so much frustration and brewing anger over this issue.
Hopefully, we will get that situation with the argument settled, and hopefully it will be dealt with privately, or maybe with themselves. We'll see. But we need to move on. Voters in the Wichita School District are going to the polls in about a month to decide on a $450 million funding plan for new facilities. Cake's Nick Nelson also back again, reporting that both sides have now begun their campaigns.
We are at a critical juncture where we cannot afford to wait too long. I think there's a danger in either delaying or, more importantly, denying the opportunity to get critical resources that can make the district stronger and our community better.
Bradley Dyer Jr. is heading up the campaign to convince voters to pass a $450 million bond for the Wichita Public Schools facility master plan. He says this plan will create better learning environments for students. However, Ben Davis, who's heading up the Vote No campaign, disagrees.
Education is not being dependent on a fresh coat of paint in a building. But you also need to be very, very clear that voting no on this is sending a very strong signal to the school district to get its house in order and its priorities straight, to start prioritizing kids' outcomes instead of new buildings. And it's also voting to give yourself a tax break.
If passed, the $450 million would go to tearing down old schools, fixing others, and rebuilding new schools. Davis maintains Wichita homeowners will see their property taxes go up, even as the district and the Vote Yes campaign say the tax rate won't go up.
We have given them bond money already. By the time you calculate the principal and the interest, almost $1 billion. How has that money been spent? Why is it that we have given you $1 billion, yet we have buildings that are in decay? How have those funds been managed or mismanaged?
Dyer says the needs of the students and their school performance are worth continuing the mill levy rate that's been in place since the last bond was passed in 2008.
The Board of Education, the superintendent, district leadership, they have all come together with feedback from educators, parents, the community, students. They've got a lot of feedback to come up with what we're referring to as a smart plan, because that plan keeps the mill levy at the same rate. The rate will not change. And so your property taxes won't increase as a result of the bond issue.
Senator Owens, do you agree with what he just said, that the mill levy or the rate will not change?
You know, the mill levy is part of the equation, right? And when we look at property tax as a whole, this is a #1 topic in Topeka this year, because people are so frustrated. I recently pulled some data over the last 10 years where we've seen inflation rise 31%, but in Harvey County, the lowest increase I could find was 64%, up to 120% increase during that same time. And so this is something that should be hotly debated. I understand investing in education, but as was mentioned, I think investing in outcomes is far more important.
And it's something to mention also that when voters in school districts pass bond issues, there is state money that goes into that kitty as well. Can you explain
Yeah,
a little bit of
there
that?
absolutely is. The state does agree to pick up a portion of that, and it's based on a kind of a complicated algorithm, but the state does pick up a portion of that. And it is so important, though, that it is the local voters. I think more tax increases should go to the local voters, and that they should have a voice in whether their taxes increase.
Esau?
You know, I think that some of the arguments being made by Mr. Davis here are a bit disingenuous. If you go to the Vote No website, you'll see that they say that 87% of teachers feel like their buildings are okay. The problem is you need to go back and look at the fact that United Teachers Wichita are the one that put the study out. They put out 4,000 they questioned 4,000 people. Only 37% of the 4,000 people responded, and they're using that as a statistic to say, well, 87% agree with this. The other thing that seems really rich to me is that the school districts had to sue the state of Kansas in order to even fund our schools at the level that we're at. And they use the semantics to say, oh, well, we're fully funding schools. You're fully funding schools based on the amount of money that you've allocated for them. You're not adequately funding schools. And anybody who's been in our school system knows that we've got buildings that are maybe not falling down, but they're leaky. We're wasting energy running some of these buildings. We've had to remediate them for asbestos. They don't have the technology of the future. So if we want our kids to be able to compete in the world of tomorrow, we have to have the facilities to make this happen.
But wasn't that the same argument that was made 10 years ago?
It may be, but the thing is the state has still never fully funded the schools. So hold on.
Fair enough.
Here's the problem though, is if the schools have not been fully or adequately funded, it's a red herring for somebody to say, well, they've got to get their numbers up first. That's like the girls in high school when I was chunky that said, hey, I'll date you when you're skinny. You know, you're putting the cart before the horse, okay? And that's why it's disingenuous. We need to put the money into it. We need to put the time into it.
Senator Owens, you got to go.
Yeah, this idea, you know what? This fully funded conversation has started with our governor, who is saying that she is fully funding education, okay? When the Supreme Court takes over the responsibility of the legislature, which is clearly defined in the Constitution that it's our responsibility to appropriate. This idea of a definition that exists of fully funding, when you look at other states, when you look at outcomes, there's so many things that go into that. So this idea that we're not fully funding education, I completely disagree with.
Pilar,
I
go
do
ahead.
want to make a point about this whole funding of education, fully or not. when the money is given to the schools, there is money given to them in silos. It's not a block grant. So if you hear all sorts of numbers put out there, 13,000 per student, 5,000 per student, whatever the number is, it's not like they can just spend that on whatever they need. A certain amount has to be spent on capital improvements. But for the most part, for capital improvements, they have to go to the voters. They don't have the option of using the vast majority of that money that is given to them by the state for capital improvements. That's why when we were in the Brownback years and there were all those cuts time and time again, and people were suffering so much financially, we saw time and time again these bond issues being defeated. And you saw schools, I went to schools where there was no heating system anymore. Schools where the windows were so bad that they were having to cover them with pillows in order to keep the kids warm during freezing sessions. I've done those stories. When you don't do maintenance on a regular basis, things get bad. This is not necessarily, this is more than just a paint of coat.
Yep.
And you have to maintain regularly, or you're going to dig yourself such a big hole that you're going to have to completely, what was they were talking about? Knocking down buildings and building new ones? Yeah. That's where you end up when you defer maintenance for too long. Yeah.
And that is going to happen. And I didn't mean to cut you off, Jared.
20 seconds.
If you vote against this, it is not going to stop your local school building from being closed. They are still going to be closed. There are still going to have to be changes made. So don't let anybody lie to you and tell you that that will change anything.
Kansas lawmakers are considering changes to improve the security and public confidence in elections. Cake's Pilar Pedraza takes a look at what's being discussed there.
A good number of these proposed bills are just going to be piling up on top of things that have already been addressed.
Looking at this list of 11 proposals to change how Kansas runs its elections and who's eligible to vote in them, political analyst Dr. Russell Arbin Fox sees a lot of familiar topics, such as making it illegal to interfere with an election officer.
Election officials are in fact citizens, so they're in fact already covered by existing laws, but somebody obviously feels that that's important.
And not counting mail-in ballots that arrive after the polls close at 7 p.m. on Election Day. But the chair of the House Elections Committee says there's one very good reason for all these ideas.
Kansas elections are safe and secure, but that doesn't matter if people don't believe it. It's as important that we have voter confidence as it is that we have secure elections.
Representative Pat Proctor's committee is diving straight in on these bills, taking up 2 in 1 week, both addressing citizenship requirements for voting. On Tuesday, they look at a bill that would order the driver's license office to hand over its list of who with a real ID as a citizen and who isn't.
The Secretary of State's office right now has sort of a handshake agreement with the DMV to do some of this already. We just want to enshrine it in statute.
And put a citizenship requirement into the Kansas Constitution.
Our Kansas Constitution doesn't actually say that you must be a citizen to vote.
As for why so many proposals, Fox says that may have something to do with the larger Republican supermajority this year at the State House.
And I wonder to what extent that may have motivated certain members of the Republican majority to say, well, we've got more wiggle room than we've had in the past.
Esau Freeman, I'll give you first dibs here.
I think it's all smoke and mirrors. I don't really have a problem with the real IDs. That seems legitimate to some extent. What gets me, though, is just like the legislator said, we don't have a problem with our elections. And then the hypocritical doublespeak that goes and says immediately after that, we've got to fix this problem. And the big problem here is that we don't have enough people voting. And so to try and disenfranchise, make it harder, or cut the time limits down is not good for Kansas and the voters having their voice.
Senator, are our elections secure?
Our elections are absolutely secure in the state of Kansas. There's no question. I'm very confident in the work that is done by our county and by our state. That being said, enshrining a right to vote in the Constitution by citizens, I think is incredibly important. These are some of the most important decisions that we make, are who we elect to represent us, and they should be legal citizens of the state of Kansas and the United States of America.
Yeah, but are we going too far in trying to make people prove that?
I don't think so.
I don't think there's a problem in making them prove it. I just think there's been a straw man argument out there. Chris Kobach's been pushing for years that we've got to do this and do that. And whatever issue he has with people from Mexico, I don't know. But I can certainly tell you that we don't have cases of immigrants that are not part of our state actually showing up and voting. If we had that, there would be reason for this to be a big topic, but we don't. And so this is just a straw man argument.
I'm going to throw out my historian perspective on this again. The concept of citizenship as the reason to have a right to vote is actually a 20th century concept. Before that, it was land ownership. It didn't matter if you were a citizen. It was if you owned land in that voting district that gave you the right to vote. And so, you know, things change. Right. And that's why we don't have that in the constitutions, because when those constitutions were put up, that wasn't how you got the right to vote.
Or because it made it easier for people from Missouri to come over and vote.
So let's throw a caveat in the bond issue and the election conversation and say, if you don't have a stake in paying taxes and you are not a landowner, or you live in an exempt property, which 30% of properties, at least in Harvey County, are exempt from any property taxes, should you have a vote on a bond issue that only impacts property taxes?
That sounds like a very white male property owner argument.
I'm just saying, though, when it impacts people, when you have a vote in something that has no impact on you.
But as a renter, if you're a renter, it does impact you because it gets passed on through your rent.
And I'm not saying that you're incorrect in that, but it still begs the question, when you have so much exempt property and you live in an exempt property, it begs the question, especially when so much of it in Harvey County is exempt. Should we look maybe at eliminating some of those exemptions?
And what about the partisan politics that get mingled into this argument?
Well, I think that Democrats have done a bad job in the past of agreeing to some of the sensible things that Republicans say. Like, there's 2 of these bills that really don't bother me. But there's another 3 of them that just seem like they're fodder for the fire. They're red meat for the masses. It's things that people are excited about, but they don't really know why. And they're just using it as a point to get people ginned up.
Yeah.
I did want to add very quickly, since I did that original story, SB 4, which is the one that would not allow ballots, mail-in ballots that arrive after 7 p.m. on election night, that has passed out of committee and gone to the full Senate. Whether it will get a vote, I don't know. You'll probably know before I do, Stephen.
with about 20 seconds here, it seems to me that all of this argument started happening when we started allowing mail-in ballots.
Well, no, it really started about 4 years ago, in my opinion, when there was serious questions in other states about whether the election was rigged or not. Okay, in Kansas, we have passed significant election integrity laws over the last 4 years, and I give great compliments to our Chairman Proctor, who has ensured that our elections are stronger today than they were 4 years ago.
All right.
But could I please put out
there? No, I can't.
Okay,
that's a wrap for this week. Thank you, Pilar, Rick, and Esau, and Stephen as well. We also want to thank Cake and KSN for sharing their stories with us. Join us next week. I'm Jared Cerullo.